Social distortion. After Friday's bombshell indictment of 13 Russian nationals, President Trump spends the weekend on Twitter, pointing the finger at everyone except Vladimir Putin and Russia. I want to bring in my panel now. Jonathan Allen is NBC's national political reporter. Seth Waxman is a former federal prosecutor. He is now a partner at the law firm Dickinson Wright. And Evan McMullen is a former CIA operative and a former independent candidate for president. Jonathan, let me start with you and just get your reaction to what we saw here over the weekend. This tweet storm, this flurry of official statements from the President of the United States. There is the diversity of things that he was talking about. There is the quantity of these tweets. There is the relentlessness of them. What did you make of what the President did over the weekend?
Even for President Trump, this was a remarkable shower of tweets that were falling on us over the weekend. I think what's going on here is the president is trying very hard to convince people that, number one, there's no connection between his campaign and Russia. Number two, that other people are responsible, namely President Obama, for not having countered Russia's measures during the election. And number three, trying to distract in some ways. He even went after his own National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster. I think what we ought to take from the indictments from the special counsel is exactly what they say, which is there was basically this sophisticated operation going on to try to help Donald Trump and try to thwart Hillary Clinton. And it does not make the connection of collusion between the campaign and Russians, but what it does show incontrovertibly to everybody's mind, except for the president, perhaps, that Russia wasn't, in fact, trying to meddle in the election. I
want to look at a few of these tweets in particular. Evan McMullen, let me ask you about one. Kristen Welker mentioned the commentary from the president about his national security advisor, about H.R. McMaster. Many foreign policy experts and practitioners were in Munich for the Munich Security Conference. Let me just read this one here. If it was the goal of Russia to create discord, disruption, and chaos within the U.S., then with all the committee hearings, investigations, and party hatred, they have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They are laughing their asses off in Moscow. Get smart, America. What's your sense here of how loud that laughter is in Russia at this point? What do you make of the tweet that he fired off there?
Well, I think they are laughing, but Donald Trump's tweet, I think, is disingenuous and ignores the fact that he is a part of their efforts in the United States. Now, some may say, well, we don't know that he's winning yet, or we don't know if there was exact collaboration between the two, or collusion, as the word is popularly used. But listen, in other countries where the Russians engage and try to influence elections, they always pick a candidate, and that candidate carries their message, the message of their internet operations and their other information warfare activities. So he's part of it. And so, yes, they are doing what he described, but he is part of that activity.
The jump off for these tweets, by all accounts, was this indictment handed up by Robert Mueller and his team on Friday, and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein commented on that on Friday. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
There is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
Seth Waxman, I'll turn to you here. The president maintaining here that what this indictment does is clears him of allegations of collusion. Jonathan talking about that just a moment ago. What do you make of what the Deputy Attorney General had to say, contrast with what we've heard from the president over the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, the president's comments that this somehow exonerates him, you know, that just doesn't carry any weight at all. I mean, this indictment came down, it puts in the allegations against the Russians of a wide-ranging conspiracy. And the question that it raises for me as a former federal prosecutor is, why is it that Donald Trump continues to not take action or make comments about Russia or Vladimir Putin when everybody else he'll attack, whether it's a company, an individual, or a country? And the thing that stands out to me is maybe because he's a co-conspirator with the Russians, that it's some indication of consciousness of guilt. When there's honor among thieves and you know that your co-conspirator has the goods on you, you may be hesitant to talk ill or take action against them. That's why Sally Yates went to the transition team and outed Michael Flynn. And begs the question is it possible, like Michael Flynn, that the President of the United States is somehow compromised?
Yeah, Evan, jump in here. There's a clarion call here for this White House to do more, at the very least to acknowledge what we all know, that Russia did play this role, sowing discord within the U.S. political landscape. What's your prescription for what the White House should do, and what's your sense of why the White House hasn't done more?
Well, what the White House needs to do is implement the sanctions that were passed overwhelmingly and in a bipartisan manner in Congress. They simply need to do that. We cannot effectively thwart these attacks. We have to deter them. Now, someday maybe we'll get to the point where we can thwart them, but it's very complicated, very tall order. We have to deter them. That's the most efficient way. But look, I think, David, we have to get beyond as a country this idea, this hope, this starting place of looking at the president as a traditional president and expecting him to do traditional American presidential things. This is a president who there's some reason why he won't implement sanctions, why he won't make standard, obvious criticisms of Putin, why even when this overwhelming evidence is provided that they did interfere in our election and just how they did it, he still won't do anything about it or to speak about it much. At least speak against Russia in that sense. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. And we have to now assume, I think, that this president is on board with the Russian activities in the United States. I think he has been all along. I think he's proven that. And we have to start taking actions as a people, especially vis-a-vis elections, to ensure that our elections remain free and fair, especially in the midterms, and that, in my view, we elect representatives and senators to Congress who will hold the president accountable and protect our democracy.
Jonathan, how's this playing within the Republican Party? What's your sense of how these tweets are ringing out on Capitol Hill? He has his supporters in Congress, a claque of supporters. I don't know how big it is now, but what do you make well, what's your sense, rather, of what they might make of what the president tweeted here?
Well, Friday was such a watershed day in terms of being a signal to Republicans that they need to worry about what the president is saying and the narrative that he has put out there. First, on the idea that Russia didn't interfere, which he maintained for a long time, and then secondarily, perhaps, that there's no collusion between anybody within the Trump orbit and the Russians. So I think what you're going to see and have seen already is a lot of Republicans, including some in the White House, quickly distancing themselves from the idea that there was no meddling at all and starting to call for more action against Russia. And you see that, everywhere from Rob Portman, the senator from Ohio, to some of what you've seen from some of his more conservative colleagues or more hardline colleagues. So I think that's the big thing. But the other thing to remember here, David, is at this point with the indictments that we've seen, you've either got the president of the United States being essentially an unwitting tool of a Russian conspiracy to elect him, or perhaps a witting tool. And that's, from a political perspective, neither one of those are good.
Very quickly here, Seth, each of these tweets is extraordinary in its own way. Let me read one about the FBI, which is particularly extraordinary, I think you could say. Very sad that the FBI missed all the many signals sent out by the Florida school shooter. This is not acceptable. They are spending too much time trying to prove Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. There is no collusion. Get back to the basics and make us all proud. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but I want to ask you from a legal perspective about that call to action at the end of that tweet. What do you make of that as a lawyer, his call to employees of the FBI?
Well, I mean, I think it's offensive. The idea that the FBI can't walk and chew gum at the same time is just it holds no water. The FBI has various divisions. There are healthcare fraud teams. There are other types of teams. There's counterintelligence teams. And there's a set group of FBI agents that are focused on the Russia investigation. The notion that their work somehow impeded or impacted the terrible events in Florida, they're just entirely unconnected events. And for the president to kind of take aim at that particular subject matter, clearly in an attempt to bolster his own position, is disappointing, to say the least.
All right, Seth Waxman, Evan McMullen, Jonathan Allen, thank you all very much. And up next,